कि जो बॉर्डर है इजराइल और गाजा का वो 50 किलोमीटर के आसपास. हाउ इज इट दैट द इजरायलीज वर नॉट अवेयर कि कुछ होने वाला है? टिपिकली व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट आरआईसी, यू टॉक अबाउट द आरआईसी विद इन ब्रिक्स, रशिया, इंडिया, चाइना. बट देयर इज अनदर आरआईसी व्हिच इज रशिया, ईरान, चाइना. These Khalistani terrorists have been targeting Indian diplomats. They have been putting out posters calling for the assassination of Indian diplomats. They took out a big procession in which they glorified the assassination of former Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi. How can you do that in broad daylight in the open in Canada? But you can do it if it's anti-India. I would imagine that we will not start a conflict.
Yeah.
But if a conflict is begun by the Pakistanis, we will end it once and for all.
Namaste Abhijit ji.
Namaste.
Finally you're here. I am having Abhijit ji, I think April के बाद.
Sure, yeah.
अभिजीत जी के साथ सबसे पहली वीडियो शूट हुई थी चैनल की. जब ये थे तब चैनल का मैंने अकाउंट भी नहीं बनाया था और आज हम रफली 44,000 सब्सक्राइबर्स पे है.
Fantastic.
All because of you, your blessings.
All because of your work, sir.
No, because the amount people love you, जो आपको प्यार देते हैं, आपके ज्ञान पे, स्पेशली आपके इन्फॉर्मेशन पे जो भरोसा है लोगों को, दैट इज़ वॉट हैज़ मेड आवर चैनल ऑल्सो क्रेडिबल एंड वी आर वेरी थैंकफुल फॉर दैट.
Always happy to talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
थैंक यू. सो आज का जो टॉपिक है मेनली टारगेट है कि एक मेजर जियोपॉलिटिकल अपडेट दे, क्योंकि दुनिया में इतना कुछ हो रहा है. सो अगर मैं सिर्फ हेडलाइंस दूँ, हमास इजराइल का कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर, फ्रांस नाइजर के बीच में जो चल रहा है, इंडिया कनाडा के बीच में जो चल रहा है, जिसमें अचानक से अभी न्यूजीलैंड ने थोड़ी दखल की है, इस सब के पीछे एक्चुअली में लोग कह रहे हैं कि यूएस और चाइना का कोल्ड वॉर फ्रंट 2.0 है. सो लेट्स स्टार्ट फ्रॉम हमास इजराइल. ये वीडियो आप पूरा देखे नहीं देखे, बट एटलीस्ट अपने टॉपिक्स पे ज़रूर देखेगा, क्योंकि आपको हर चीज़ के बारे में क्रिस्प जानकारी मिलने वाली है. क्योंकि लास्ट 2 दिन पहले भी इतनी सारी चीज़ें हुई है. So we are going to try to cover everything. So हमास और इजराइल, ये अचानक से 7 अक्टूबर को जो अटैक हो गया, गाजा स्ट्रिप की जो बॉर्डर है वो सिर्फ 35 माइल्स की है रफली, और बहुत ही हेविली गार्डेड है, पर वो इतना इजीली आके अटैक करके फिर किडनैप करके भी चले गए. ये सब हो क्या रहा था? और इजराइल से जो वन ऑफ द हाईएस्ट रेटेड मोसाड एजेंसी, उसकी इतनी most advanced technology. So what is wrong with Israel right now?
Something has gone wrong clearly. Abhi let's understand the background. See, Israel is a nation that is under siege. वो हर तरफ से घिरा हुआ है. उसके सारे आसपास सारे के सारे दुश्मन है उसके. साउथ में इजिप्ट है, जिसका उसके अच्छे रिलेशंस टिपिकली रहे हैं सिंस द 1970s, बट इट इज स्टिल एन इस्लामिक कंट्री, इजिप्ट. और इफ यू लुक एट द सराउंडिंग कंट्रीज, देयर ऑल देयर एनिमीज. यू हैव द वेस्ट बैंक, यू हैव गाजा, यू हैव सीरिया, यू हैव जॉर्डन, यू हैव लेबनान ऑन द नॉर्थ. अगर वेस्ट में जाएंगे तो अक्रॉस द मेडिटेरेनियन यू हैव टर्की. हर जगह से इट इज सराउंडेड बाय एनिमीज. Now, 1973 में it is said that Israel had its worst ever intelligence failure.
Okay.
The Yom Kippur War. Okay, it was completely taken by surprise, and lots of heads eventually rolled because of the intelligence failure. 50 years to that date, you had this thing which happened.
It was the anniversary of that.
Yes, the 50th anniversary. 50वीं सालगिरह थी इस अनफॉर्चुनेट इवेंट की फ्रॉम इजराइल्स पर्सपेक्टिव.
Hamas knows how to make a entrance or something.
Yeah, so the question is this, like you said, कि जो बॉर्डर है इजराइल और गाजा का वो 50 किलोमीटर के आसपास है.
Okay.
Whatever माइल किलोमीटर जो भी है,
Yes.
roughly 50 kilometers है. It is one of the most closely guarded borders on the entire planet. वायर फेंसिंग है हर जगह, मोशन सेंसर्स है, CCTV कैमरास है, देयर इज ऑल काइंड्स ऑफ सर्वेलेंस. द इजरायलीज हैव द शिन बेत, दे हैव द मोसाद, दे हैव सर्वेलेंस विद इन गाजा इटसेल्फ, दे हैव इंटेलिजेंस विद इन गाजा. हाउ इज इट दैट द इजरायलीज वर नॉट अवेयर कि कुछ होने वाला है? इट अपीयर्स दैट दे वर गिवन सम इंटेलिजेंस फ्रॉम द इजिप्शियंस. The Egyptians had given them some intelligence, and apparently some other countries also had given them intelligence, and they have their own intelligence gathering mechanisms, supposedly the best in the world, Mossad, Shin Bet and all that. Kya hua? How did how did Hamas just walk across that Israel-Gaza border, walk into Israel, cut the wires and all that? There was no triggering of motion sensors. They came via those paragliders or whatever it is, motorized paragliders, and the Israelis were unaware.
Yeah.
How does that happen? I mean, if you look at it cumulatively from a big picture perspective, it looks like it's an intelligence failure that's worse than the 1973 intelligence failure. And it simply doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. How does a nation that is so advanced in surveillance and in intelligence gathering, how does a nation get caught completely unawares? कुछ तो अजीब सा हुआ है यहाँ पे. Okay, I don't have the answers, but something
प्लस
doesn't add up.
2000 प्लस रॉकेट्स उन्होंने ऐसे ही इजराइल पे मार दिए.
अभी भी चल रहा है.
अभी भी चल रहा है.
अभी भी चल रहा है.
They didn't know कि इतना सारा स्टैक है उनके पास रॉकेट्स का.
How did they not know that they've stockpiled 5-10,000 rockets? How did they not know it? They see, the world knows, Israel knows that the Hamas people have been constructing these tunnels. ठीक है, वो लोग बहुत सारे टनल्स बना रहे हैं. They have made lots of tunnels. They have a huge network of tunnels in which they hide stuff. But how is it that the Israelis had no clue whatsoever कि इतने सारे rockets है, ये सब हो रहा है, इतने सारे plans है. You cannot conduct an operation like the one that the Hamas people conducted without incredibly detailed planning, without at least one or two fake operations going on to keep the Israelis off guard. But come on, how did the Israelis not know this? So either it is a shockingly huge intelligence failure, or there is something else going on which we are not aware of. I'm just speculating, maybe the Israelis wanted the excuse to go to war.
Okay.
Maybe, but then that means that if that is the case, then they were okay with their own people getting kidnapped and killed, which I don't know if it's true or not. Collateral damage, I mean. So I don't know what really happened. Maybe in 20, 30, 50 years, they will write history books in which the truth will come out. Right now, we don't know what happened.
Are you sure truth आएगा क्योंकि normally एक अलग ही version आता है.
Well, today we have a certain good version of the 1973 Yom Kippur War and all those wars, in which it is very clear there was an intelligence failure. So eventually, truth may come out. But right now, Israel is under siege. So on the one hand, we have Gaza. अभी गाजा को उन्होंने बहुत बॉम्बार्ड किया है, ऑलमोस्ट फ्लैट कर दिया है. आई मीन सम पार्ट्स ऑफ गाजा दे वांट टू गो आफ्टर द हमास लीडरशिप एंड डिस्ट्रॉय इट. दे वांट टू इरेडिकेट हमास. वो कुछ दिन से बोल रहे कि वी आर प्लानिंग अ लैंड इन्वेजन ऑफ गाजा, बुट्स ऑन द ग्राउंड, दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग. भाई दैट इज काइंड ऑफ द यूक्रेनियन काउंटर ऑफेंसिव दैट हैज नेवर कम, राइट? सो बोल रहे लेकिन अभी तक हुआ नहीं है.
बट ऐसा लग रहा है कि यूएस इज ट्राइंग टू डिले दैट टैक्टिक.
The US is also playing a certain kind of role. Biden has been saying that there should not be civilian casualties in Gaza. कुछ तो ऐसे statements कर रहा है वो.
They have been very smartly saying कि गाजा से वॉर है, पैलेस्टाइन से वॉर नहीं है. बट जो वो गाजा वाला जो आई मेंट टू से कि हमास से वॉर है एंड पैलेस्टाइन से वॉर नहीं है, पैलेस्टाइनियंस से दुश्मनी नहीं है. बट वो जो एरिया है गाजा का, दैट इज रन बाय हमास गवर्नमेंट ओनली, राइट?
It is run by Hamas, yes.
सो वो तो वही चीज हो गई.
Well, you can always make a distinction between the leadership and the civilians.
But they're hiding under the civilian buildings, right?
The Hamas has always done that. They have used civilians as human shields. So typically when you do a war and you have a certain territory, you try to keep your war fighting away from the civilian buildings like hospitals and schools and all that. In the case of Hamas, they kind of do the opposite. So that if the Israelis want to target Hamas, then they have to kill civilians, and it makes them look bad. So Hamas has done that.
यूक्रेन में भी ऐसे ही हुआ था.
यूक्रेन में भी ऐसा हुआ था, yes.
Because now they can blame Russia is doing war crimes.
Russia is a killer of civilians, ऐसा दिखाने के लिए. So yeah, I mean that's what Hamas has done. That's what the Ukrainians also did. So on the one hand, you have Gaza that the Israelis have bombarded, and they may eventually in the next maybe day or two, maybe 5 days, maybe 3 weeks, whatever, they may do a land invasion of Gaza. There's also the West Bank on the other side.
Yes.
Okay, if you look at the geography, if you look at the map, you will know that there's a place called the West Bank. The West Bank of the River Jordan, which is essentially the kind of the border between Israel and the nation of Jordan. On the north of Israel, you have Lebanon, where you have a whole different entity called Hezbollah. So Hezbollah also, there is some action going on between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah wants to destroy Israel just like Hamas does. So, and there is action going on. So it looks like Israel may be caught in a two-front, maybe 2.5 front war. The kind of thing that we talk about in India.
Wow.
That when India goes to war, it may be not just a 2-front war, maybe a 2.5 front war.
Yeah.
Israel seems to be in that situation right
even
now.
in a 1 crore population, not even 1 crore population country.
Yeah. A small country, it's a small country. If you look at the geography of Israel, there are parts of Israel where the widest part is about 10 kilometers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very narrow. So that's the kind of thing there is. So Israel is caught in that situation. And this war may escalate. It may go further because see, for example, Hamas and Hezbollah have typically had ties, connections, funding, etc., coming from Iran.
Yeah.
Okay, Iran is involved in some way or the other. Now, where Iran is involved, Iran has there is the other RIC. See, typically when you talk about RIC, you talk about the RIC within BRICS, Russia, India, China.
Yeah.
But there's another RIC which is Russia, Iran, China.
Okay.
Okay, and and the Russians are buying lots of Iranian drones for fighting the Ukraine war. The Shahed 2 drones and other drones, they're buying Iranian weapons. Iran has a good stockpile of weaponry. So Russia and Iran are involved together. China is investing big time in Iran. China has a strategic relationship with Iran. So when Iran is involved, you have Russia and China also who are in the background. Okay, and as we know, there's this war going on in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, which is going nowhere. So, and here's the situation: the Israelis have been sending arms and ammunition to Ukraine to fight against Russia.
Yeah.
Okay, the whole of the Western world has been sending arms and ammunition
Yes,
to Ukraine.
absolutely.
Ukraine has been consuming enormous quantities of arms and ammunition on a daily basis. Because of this, the stockpiles are very low in the West, in the US, in Germany, in Western Europe, also in Israel. Now Israel is in a situation where it needs arms and ammunition to fight this two-front war, possible two-front war, but they have sent so much ammunition to Israel, to Ukraine, and they may be low on ammunition. Now, what does Israel do when it's low on ammunition and it's attacked from two sides? It may first of all either ask the US to get involved, which kind of expands the scope of the conflict, because then it becomes a multinational conflict.
Yes.
Okay, if the US gets involved, Iran is also involved, and there's always the possibility of escalation. Always the possibility of escalation. And then if the Iranians, since they have significant stockpiles, they keep arming Hamas and Hezbollah, then it's a huge problem for Israel and the US. Then the Israelis may be tempted to ask the Americans to target Iran directly, which is not that easy as it sounds. And if the Americans get involved in Iran directly, that's a whole different front that opens up.
NATO comes in.
NATO comes in, other stuff comes in. And if Israel is still finding itself under a big pinch, then they have the last option called the Samson option.
Okay.
The Samson option means if I go, everybody goes. If I go down under, everybody goes down under, I will take everybody with me.
So it's a nuclear option?
It's a nuclear option.
Okay.
Okay? So that's another option they have. But if they go nuclear, Iran also may be on the verge of going nuclear. Okay, they have been enriching uranium and all that for some time. So there is the possibility of this entire conflict spiraling out of control.
So there is this conspiracy theory that I have been hearing around कि roughly $6 billion के जो arms थे from US that went missing, that was supposed to go to Ukraine. And some of them, roughly, let's say 1/3 of it, roughly, is now with Hamas. जब वो attack कर रहे थे, उसमें मिले.
It's not a conspiracy theory. It's something that actually happened. Somehow it
And
happened.
they are saying कि ये जानबूझ के किया गया है so that US and the West find a reason to attack Iran because they are almost nuclear now.
Yeah, so, we are inching closer and closer to the possibility of a multinational conflict here. Now, this is not exactly World War III because the big guns are not involved. Iran is a medium gun. It's not a big gun.
Okay.
Okay, but if they have nukes, which is a possibility, they may possibly at least have enough material to create a dirty bomb, not exactly a nuclear bomb, but they may. So that is something that is
So
concerned.
dirty bomb and nuclear bomb में क्या फर्क है?
So a dirty bomb is a conventional explosive.
Okay.
Okay, in which you add some nuclear fissile material, like uranium or whatever, or plutonium, so that it contaminates a large area. So with the explosion of the conventional explosive, it will disperse all that radioactive material in a wide area. Vaporize it and disperse it over a wide area, which causes nuclear contamination and fallout. So you can do this without having a nuclear explosive as such. You just add some, I don't know how many kilos, I'll not go into the numbers, but you add some kilos of fissile material or radioactive material to a regular explosive, to a conventional explosive. That's called a dirty bomb. So that's just to cause radiation damage everywhere. So the Iranians may definitely be capable of doing that.
Yeah, seems like it. Yeah.
Yeah, because they have a nuclear program, they have a nuclear enrichment program, they have been running these centrifuges, they want to create their own nuclear weapons. They may be close to creating nuclear weapons. They may already have enough material for 1 or 2 nukes, possibly. Who knows?
And that is enough.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So this could be a nuclear. This could go nuclear if the world is not careful. So we are inching closer and closer towards the possibility, towards the specter of a multinational conflict that could expand beyond Israel and cause a lot of damage, possibly. But that's not good for the world.
Yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
बट जितना मुझे न्यूज़ में या जो भी ट्वीट्स में पढ़ रहा हूँ, ऐसे लग रहा है कि इजराइल इज एक्चुअली डोमिनेटिंग द वॉर राइट नाउ एंड मेनी कंट्रीज आर कॉलिंग कि दिस इज़ नॉट सेल्फ डिफेंस एनी मोर, दिस इज़ मोर ऑफ अ वॉर क्राइम सिचुएशन जहाँ पे द इस्लामिक कंट्रीज आर नाउ कॉलिंग आउट इजराइल फॉर दैट. बट लिसनिंग टू यू इट सीम्स कि इजराइल इज ऑल्सो अंडर अ लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर.
Israel is definitely under a lot of pressure. It is facing the heat from at least 2 angles. There's this northern
सीरिया ने भी कुछ किया है.
Syria.
और they bombed Syria.
They bombed so Syria. They bombed
some
Amman
border
or
part.
something or the other. They bombed some airports here and there.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they
yeah.
have been doing that. They are facing the heat from Hezbollah. They're facing the heat from Hamas. Look, when it comes to social media and the way these conflicts are portrayed, it's all a game of propaganda.
Yeah.
Okay, one side will always try to make the other look like a war criminal. The truth is somewhere in between. I'm not saying Israel is Dood Ka Dhula.
Yeah.
Okay, they have also done things that maybe they should not have done. But Hamas is the one that started this all. Okay, that is indisputable. They started the current conflict. So I will not go into who's morally right, who's morally wrong. There is no right or wrong in war. There is no
yeah.
right or wrong in geopolitics and warfare. Whoever comes on the top will write the history eventually.
Like how that barrages of rockets, one misfired, which they say misfired, but probably looks it was planned. वो hospital पे गया and
fell on a hospital.
Yeah, and now they are blaming Israel for that.
One side is blaming Israel. The other side is blaming Hamas. So who knows who actually did what? I don't want to get into that. This is war. In war, bad things happen. It's very unfortunate. We don't want it to happen, but that's just the way the world is.
Yeah.
So right now, Israel is facing the situation. I don't know who's portraying that Israel is winning or whatever, but right now the entire Islamic world is against Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? And there is going to be a temptation in the Islamic world if the Gaza situation becomes worse and worse, if more civilians die, it's going to be a temptation among the Islamic world to all band together, come together and attack Israel.
But wouldn't that get all the West countries also into this?
Well, that's the thing, right? Because
But they won't be able to handle them, right?
See, what can the West do? Okay, let's say Turkey gets involved.
Yeah.
Okay,
But NATO,
Turkey is part of NATO, but Turkey has its own ambitions.
Yeah.
Turkey doesn't really
Caliphate
care about
ambition.
NATO.
Yeah.
Okay, they have been playing this game of geopolitical rent-seeking for a very long time, for decades, because of their geographical location. So Turkey has its own imperial ambitions. They have this ambition of creating the Ottoman Empire again. You know, that's a hidden ambition. And they may be tempted to take over the leadership of the Islamic world by attacking Israel. We took it. We did this thing first, that sort of thing. Egypt may be tempted to get involved in this.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia, how long will they keep quiet? Iran.
But Saudi has a lot of American weapons. Will they
course
be
they
able
do.
to use it?
Well, that's the thing, right? Eventually,
They have so many F-35s, but for what? They can't.
their F-35s and their weapons are actually as a leverage against Iran. The
Okay.
Saudis fear Iran more than anything else.
Okay, so this is again new angle because अभी Israel के against थे, but now they
It's a
also
very
have another
complicated region. The Middle East is very complicated.
Sunni Shia.
Yeah, very, very complicated. There is the thing of Qatar also. Qatar is sitting there, which is the US puppet actually, okay?
Okay.
Of course.
Okay, explain me this.
Yeah.
There are two countries who are absolutely outlandishly saying and supporting Hamas. Is Qatar and Iran.
Uh-huh.
And some parts you can say Lebanon, Hezbollah is there, but Lebanon is raising their hands that we are not part of this. Even Saudis are like waiting and watching. Only UAE has completely, washed their hands of this. ये क्या चल रहा है? Because Qatar, you are saying, is a US vassal.
Of
then
course.
Iran is US enemy.
Yeah.
But Qatar and Iran are, targeting Israel, supporting Hamas.
See, when it comes to Israel, everybody, Shia, Sunni, everybody will target Israel. They will come together for this one particular case. But apart from that, they have their own problems. They have their own enmities. Okay, the Shias and the Sunnis don't like each other. Iraq is an interesting case because it's about 40-50% Shia. Unlike what people think, it's not a Sunni country.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a country with a
But
mixed population.
Israel is like a dot in that whole map.
But it's supported by the biggest dog in the world, which is the US, right? The biggest daddy of them all. So the US, see, historically, the Middle East region was the place from where the world got its oil, from its energy. It was incredibly important for the US to have control over this region. And how do you control this region? By keeping it permanently in chaos and turmoil. And then you be the mediator and you kind of arm everybody against each other and create a certain balance of power. Now the US has become completely self-sufficient in oil and gas and all that.
Okay.
So now they don't really care about this region that much, but they care about Israel. I mean, it's a bipartisan thing. So that's the deal. And they use certain countries for specific purposes. Qatar has a very specific purpose. I mean, the entire Taliban negotiations, all that happened in Doha,
Okay.
right?
Oh,
the
okay.
Doha agreement and all that. So that is one thing. Qatar it has a US military presence of some kind on its territory. It is a very large, major exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas.
All the oil extracting companies are American.
Yeah, of course, all that. Yeah, so that's the thing.
It's a joke, actually.
It's a very complicated region. It's been complicated by outside forces, not by the local forces. All the lines of the map have been drawn by outsiders, first of all.
Especially Saudi.
Saudi Arabia.
Very
All
disputed.
wherever you have maps with straight lines, it means there's an outside influence in drawing the map. Because organically, boundaries are never straight lines.
Never straight
organically, if they occur organically. So that's the thing. So the Middle East is very complicated. It's been kept artificially under permanent state of crisis, and now things are playing out in a certain way, and there is still a very strong external hand in this, right? So it looks like it could explode. It could blow up and create huge problems for the world. And that could spill over in our region also, because we are not. It's not our immediate neighborhood, but it's our extended neighborhood. It's not really
and
far
we are
from
still
here.
dependent on oil from them.
Yeah. So we have good relations with the Saudis. We have good relations with the UAE.
Even Irani.
With Iran also. We have actually excellent relations with Saudi and
Yeah.
Iran. And the UAE, and good relations with Iran. So we are not part of any of these
Conflicts.
things that's going on over there right now, but we have to be careful. So one of the things that came out of the G20 summit was the IMEC, India Middle East Economic and Trade Corridor and Transportation Corridor, which was supposed to pass through Saudi Arabia and through
Israel.
through Jordan,
Israel,
and then
yeah.
go over to Greece, bypassing Turkey. So that is right now not
Even
going to
Suez Canal was bypassed, right?
Yeah, so that is not going to happen anytime soon because of the conflict that's happening right
Yeah.
now. The Saudis and the UAE guys wanted this to go ahead immediately.
Okay.
They said as soon as the thing is done, within 30 days, let's start construction.
Oh.
Okay, so that's how it was.
And
Now,
they can actually do that.
they can do it.
Yeah.
They can do it. It's all empty land. It's a desert and all. You can do it. You don't have to get land permissions and remove people and all that. It's all empty. So it
now
could have happened
that's
fast.
out in the air.
So right now it's not happening. We need the situation to stabilize and go back to normal. Only then can the IMEC go ahead. So right now it's not going.
So how much of an Abraham Accords जो signature होने में थे?
हाँ.
So was that Hamas का timing related to that?
See, yeah, the Abraham Accords was the first step in normalizing the relations between the
Which was started by Trump.
Yeah, by Trump, between the Arabic Muslim nations and Israel. It was an excellent initiative. Nobody has done that. And it seems that, we know that the Saudis and the Israelis were in an advanced stage of negotiations for normalizing relations and establishing proper diplomatic contact, relations between the two nations.
Yeah.
It was in the advanced stages, maybe the final stages
Yeah.
of negotiation. And now that's gone. Now that's gone. It's not going to go ahead anytime soon because of this conflict. So the normalization between the Saudis and the Israelis has been stopped because of this conflict. Lots of things have been stopped because of this conflict that suddenly exploded out of nowhere just a month and a half or so ago. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that's happening.
Because if we
Interesting timing.
go back to the starting point which we talked about, it seems like Israel let it happen because they wanted to go for war. Now they were almost about to sign Abraham Accords. If you look at from this perspective, it looks like Israel sabotaged this whole thing.
In case it is Israel
If
that was
it is
aware
like
of it
this.
and they allowed this to happen. In case, but we don't sure if it is the case. obviously, it's very strange that this happened and Israel was not aware of it. So it looks like maybe, perhaps, possibly, they wanted this to happen. Possibly. But we don't have evidence. So we cannot go with that story only. There are multiple possibilities. Yeah.
So what should India learn from Ukraine-Russia conflict, Israel-Hamas conflict? Because India is also surrounded by two fronts at least. Let's keep the 0.5 front aside. क्योंकि पाकिस्तान है, चाइना है, वो भी एक थ्रेट हमेशा रहता है because historically whenever the war has happened, usually there is some kind of an internal unrest जो एक हमेशा पॉलिटिकल इंस्टेबिलिटी होती है या फिर चाइना में या पाकिस्तान में, एंड दे यूज दिस एज अ टैक्टिक टू डाइवर्ट अटेंशन टू इंडिया एंड मे बी विन द वॉर और हैव सम काइंड ऑफ लेवरेज. सो what should India?
Yeah, what are the
because
lessons?
right now Pakistan and China are looking very weak comparatively.
The appearances are deceptive. Okay,
Yeah.
we can never take anybody for granted. We can never underestimate anybody, even your weak opponents. You cannot underestimate them. So, what are the lessons that we can learn from this?
Yeah.
First of all, you need political stability. Israel has been roiled by political instability. Coalition government after coalition government after coalition government. Weak governments come and go. Nadav Lapid, no, Yair Lapid was there.
Okay.
Then Naftali Bennett was there. Now Netanyahu is back.
And last 2 years I think.
You cannot have a situation where you have weak coalition governments that come and go. And then you have this internal turmoil about the judicial reforms that the Netanyahu government wants to enact. And there's been this enormous outpouring of protests against that, which seems to be astroturf, which seems to be like a color revolution kind of thing that the Americans excel at doing. So maybe
That happened at moment's notice like that.
yeah, these demonstrations appear out of nowhere at moment's notice. Very well coordinated,
Ports,
very well
airports, all
organized.
staff.
Everything is available. So it's very fishy. But yeah, so you can't have that in your country.
Yeah.
You need political stability. You need a strong government. That's lesson number one that we need to have. That we need to learn. Second,
with the elections coming up within 6 months.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
very important. Second thing is you need huge stockpiles of arms and ammunition. You can't have enough weapons to fight a 2-week or 3-week war. You need to have a 6-month minimum stockpile of ammunition and weapons. You need to have factories that can produce large quantities of arm and keep producing them 24/7 on demand whenever required. You need to have these things. Thirdly, you need to fight 21st century wars, not 20th century wars.
Yeah.
What that means is that you need to use the latest weaponry, the latest technology, drone swarms, drones. Today you can kill a tank that costs almost $1 million with with a $20,000 drone.
Okay.
Yeah. So India needs to invest in loitering munitions, suicide kamikaze drones, drone swarms, things like that. So whatever the Russians and the Ukrainians they have learned in the Ukraine war, we need to incorporate those lessons. And the Israelis also seem to not have learned those lessons, because I have seen some footage of their Merkava tanks being wiped out
Okay.
by drones, by cheap drones. So all those things need to be taken into account. And obviously India needs to never underestimate a nation like Pakistan. Yes, Pakistan is economically insignificant today. They have all kinds of problems, but they are still a nuclear armed nation, and they are still important because they have support from outside. So you cannot underestimate them. We need to have very clear contingency plans for each nation. If there's a two-front war, what do you do with Pakistan? What do you do with China? What actions do you take? Ideally, you want to neutralize the Pakistan threat within 15 minutes, the first 15 minutes of war, and without going nuclear. So there are ways of doing that. I'll not go into how you could do it. There are multiple ways of doing that. But ideally, within the first 15 minutes, the main Pakistani threat should be over, which is the aerial threat.
But do you think India's intention will be that? Because historically we are not that brutal, right?
The next war has to be the last war when it comes to Pakistan. Historically, we have not been brutal. That's the past 70 years, and we have been losers the past 70 years. This is a different India. After
Yeah.
2014, India has been very different. Look, it's about national interest. It's not about ye अच्छा नहीं है, वो अच्छा नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए. National interest comes first. And the national interest says that Pakistan needs to cease existing as a single entity on the Western Front, because it is a problem for us. It's always going to be a problem as long as it exists. We have to break it up. And ideally, we should do it without causing too much damage to the civilians who are innocent, obviously. more or less. But,
But they
yeah.
are heavily radicalized, don't you think?
Yeah, so all that. So Pakistan has to be dealt with, and China has to be dealt with in a different manner. China on the Tibet frontier. So that's a whole different thing because see,
वहाँ पे ज़्यादा human skill ज़्यादा काम आएगी than weapons.
well, mountain warfare is all about human factor. It's about the human factor. You can't have tanks that go up and down mountains. You can have some weapons and technology that will be useful in mountain warfare, but a lot of it is gonna end up in man-to-man fighting. A lot of it. So the human factor is important over there. The Chinese obviously they have been trying to acclimatize to the incredible altitudes. It goes to -40, -60 in November, December in the Chushul Rizangla region. Shocking. You stand there, you'll be gasping for air. That's how high the
Okay.
altitude is, and the temperatures are shocking. So the human factor is very important there. And at such high altitudes, even tanks will give you a less throughput from their engines and all that. So there's a whole host of factors. The most important thing is look at China's weak points. China's weak points are that the entire terrain is exposed. They've been building, bunkers under mountains and all these days to offset that. The other problem the Chinese face is that they have only 2 or 3 lines of communication between Beijing and the Tibet region. There's a railway line, there's a road line. If you take that out, they're cut off.
It's their chicken neck.
Yeah, it's their chicken neck, so to say. So we have advantages that we can certainly leverage, but to be able to do that, see, it will not be very hard for India to take Tibet and cut off Tibet. Okay, cut off Tibet and put some presence there. But will we be able to hang on to it on the long term? That's the question. For that, you need very robust infrastructure. You need lots of arms and ammunition, huge stockpiles of that.
And we don't realize, but Tibet is a huge country. It's not a small.
Enormous. It's enormous.
It
And it's very
almost
difficult
covers
terrain.
the whole border of India-China, right? Almost. Like there is just a part of Aksai Chin area which is
That is
connected to
Chinese occupied
China.
Ladakh, the
Yeah.
Pangong region and Aksai Chin. That is Chinese occupied Ladakh because Aksai Chin was not part of Tibet. It was part of Ladakh. So that is the region that's part of Ladakh, which the Chinese currently temporarily occupy. But Tibet is enormous. Tibet is an enormous plateau. Most of the major rivers of Asia come out of Tibet. You know?
Okay.
Yeah, most of the like the Mekong, Maganga. Mekong is Maganga actually.
Oh.
Yeah. The Mekong River, all the major rivers, the Brahmaputra, for instance, the Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati no longer, but Sindhu.
Yeah.
Most of the major rivers come from the Tibet region.
Okay, so the glaciers, everything is in Tibet.
Yeah. So many of the rivers that come into India come from the Kailash range,
Yeah.
that region, this Mansarovar region and all that.
yeah.
So that way. So India will have to make sure that at least when it comes to Pakistan, the next war is the last war. When it comes to China, we have to, if there is a war, we have to inflict huge pain on China and take territory that they could not imagine that we would take. So that gives you leverage and negotiation power and all that.
So recently, 2-4 दिन पहले ही, again Pakistan violated the LOC.
Yeah.
There were some firings and everything. So India right now, I don't know what approach they have. I think बोलते तो है न्यूज़ में कि एक मारेंगे तो 10 गोली हम मारेंगे. But is India waiting for a big reason that justifies their approach to POJK? They try to get POJK back.
See, I'm not sure if India is planning right now कि इतने समय में POJK वापस लेके आना है or whatever. I think it is more. Obviously, I don't know what's really going on in the minds and eyes of the government and the military. They will know what to do best. But I would imagine that we will not start a conflict.
Yeah.
But if a conflict is begun by the Pakistanis, we will end it once and for all. So we obviously.
So even if we won't even go first to take POJK back when it's the right time, even if there's no
See, ideally, in an ideal situation, Pakistan should break up on its own.
Yeah.
Okay, ideally, without us having to fire a single shot. The greatest victory is the victory in which you don't fire a single shot. So that's the ideal situation. If that does not happen, then maybe in the future, when we feel the time is right and we are now inevitable, then we can do such a thing. But what the conditions for that would be, I cannot say right now. So I don't think we should think about POJK right now in the next 2-3 years. by the end of this decade, I am sure Pakistan will cease to exist, most likely. Okay, in the shape and form that it is today. It may be a broken nation. It may be a collection of 3-4 nations, perhaps. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa may go back to Afghanistan. I would welcome that for sure. If that happens, and if that sort of breakup happens, POJK will automatically come back to India. So we should engineer it internally within Pakistan in a way that we don't have to do anything at all from the military perspective. That's the ideal situation. Without us firing a single shot and losing a single man, we can get our objectives done within this decade, ideally. वो अच्छा रहेगा.
So ideally, Pakistan has one more World Cup to play.
Maybe one more World Cup to play. Yes, not two. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, because जो अभी अफगानिस्तान ने क्रिकेट मैच जीता पाकिस्तान के सामने, one of the players officially said during the presentation कि it is dedicated to people who are being forcibly sent from Pakistan back to Afghanistan.
Yes, so the Pakistanis are now sending back Afghan refugees into Afghanistan, and they are treating them very brutally. मारपीट कर रहे हैं और पता नहीं क्या क्या कर रहे हैं. Standard Pakistani atrocities against innocent people. So yes, the Afghans obviously feel the pain, and they won't forget.
So it is again the question comes back कि मुस्लिम्स पहले तो लड़ते हैं कि हमें अलग कंट्री चाहिए, फिर बाद में उसमें मुस्लिम्स को भी आप पहले तो फतवा निकाल के या कोर्ट केस लड़के, जैसे अहमदियास को काफिर घोषित कर दिया, या ऐसे जो ये लोग करते हैं, दे क्रिएट मोर डिविजन्स बिटवीन देम देन वन ऑफ द कास्ट और समथिंग. जैसे शिया सुन्नी एक डोमिनेंट निकलेगी, फिर वो दूसरों को वापस वॉर करके या मार के भगा देगी दूसरे में. जैसे अफगानिस्तान इज ऑल्सो मुस्लिम डोमिनेटेड, बट उनको भी भगाया जा रहा है अपनी जगह पे. वैसे तो मुस्लिम ब्रदरहुड की बात होती है.
Look, I am not an expert in any sense when it comes to Islam and the divisions within Islam and all that. But this is an age-old story. If you look at the Middle East, it's all Islamic nations fighting each other. So it's always been that way, and there is no surprise. So they talk about the brotherhood within Islam, but it doesn't seem to be very much a brotherhood, because we can see them fighting all the time. So it's just an observational piece of evidence that we have. What can we say about that?
So now let's take our attention towards Russia and Ukraine conflict. What is the latest update? Because last 2-3 months it seems that there is a kind of a stalemate. Putin is still not, confident enough to take his whole army with air force and just end the war. I don't know if he expected himself कि ये war इतना लंबा चल जाएगा. What is your perspective? Because दूर से तो हमें दिख रहा है एक layman, एक novice person के हिसाब से. But what is your expert opinion on this?
जैसे मैंने कहा अभी कि we would ideally want Pakistan to break up on its own, and we don't have to do anything extra.
Yeah.
Putin is waiting for that to happen in Ukraine.
Okay.
Now that the Middle East is hotting up, the cash flow to Ukraine has slowed down to a trickle. Okay? Cash flow, Zelensky was getting billions of dollars every month for fighting the war against Russia. He was getting arms, ammunition from everywhere in the world. सब धीरे धीरे बंद हो रहा है.
Because Israel also $10 billion they asked from US.
Yeah, so now the West is kind of, trying to neglect Ukraine. धीरे धीरे सब cash flow बंद हो रहा है, arms, ammunition बंद हो रहा है, and Ukraine will soon be, they have lost incredible numbers of soldiers. Okay, the flower of their army is gone. It's dead. It's finished. It's wiped out. They're underground now. Once the cash flow stops and once the arms and ammunition stops, then Russia will just walk in and nobody will be able to stop them. That's what Vladimir Putin is waiting for. So what will eventually most likely happen is that Zelensky will flee.
Okay.
And Putin will walk in and install a puppet government, rewrite the constitution of Ukraine, and give maybe some part of Western Ukraine to Poland, perhaps, possibly, if need be.
But Poland is NATO, right? NATO country?
I think it's NATO, if I'm not mistaken. याद नहीं है मुझे, but it's quite possibly NATO.
So yes. Poland is trying to play both sides?
Poland is playing its own side. There's no both side there. If Poland gains territory from Ukraine, who will be unhappy? It's a gain for NATO also, right?
So they are free from the charges of being a war criminal?
They haven't gone to war. They haven't fired a single shot.
They're trying to take the territory, right?
No, who has taken any territory? They have not taken a single inch of territory right now.
Yeah, but they intend to, right?
It is speculation right now. But it may eventually end up that way. But they will take territory without firing a single shot.
Best kind of victory.
Best kind of victory. It falls into your lap. और क्या चाहिए? So there is no war there. Okay, so historically, some parts of Western Ukraine were part of Poland historically. See, boundaries change. Boundaries change. Places like Lviv, which was then Lvov and all that, were part of Poland. Okay, at some points in time, boundaries change, cities have changed hands, and territories have changed hands. So Poland will be happy to take some parts of of Western Ukraine back if the opportunity presents itself and this territory falls into their lap. Eventually, they may be happy to do that. Or maybe it will become an independent nation, perhaps, that Western Ukraine, and it will become whatever is left of Ukraine, and the rest of it may be either Russian vassal or maybe part of Russian territory, or who knows. But eventually, what will happen is that the situation that we have currently is not sustainable for too long. Once the funding dries out, once the arms and ammunition supplies dry out, once the fuel supplies dry out, what will Zelensky and his army do? To fight a war, you need certain things. You need money, you need energy, which is gas and oil and all that, and you need weapons and ammunition, and you need soldiers. So eventually, once all that dries out, the war is over. Putin just walks in. So that's what he's waiting for. Why will he risk his air force? He has a huge air force.
Yeah.
Why will he risk a single plane? When it comes, when in a few months down the line, he will get everything on, just for free. Not for free, because paid a huge price for it, but still. So that's what I believe could happen.
Okay, in near future.
Maybe in the next 6 months, maybe in the next 2 years also.
Okay.
Wait it out. क्या जाता है?
Okay.
But it could be sooner rather than later.
Because there are many voices that are saying कि after the Prigozhin Wagner coup, which they attempted, which almost was successful, but Russia was able to squash that. People say कि वो जो उनका एक महल है, I'm forgetting, Kremlin, I think. तो उसमें बैठे बैठे he still has a lot of insecurity कि there are people who might go and rebellion हो सकता है. So that is
let's
also,
talk about that coup.
okay. Yeah.
So the Wagner coup, the Prigozhin coup. Mr. Prigozhin is dead now, right?
Yeah.
So किस महीने में हुआ था? कुछ महीने पहले हुआ था,
Yeah,
right?
some 3-4 months. Yeah.
So here's the deal. So what is Wagner? Wagner है क्या? Wagner is a paramilitary force. It is not officially part of the Russian armed forces.
It's a private army.
It's a private army. It's a mercenary army. Say whatever you want.
But they are very nationalist, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was run and controlled by Mr. Prigozhin. Mr. Prigozhin was the co-founder or the leader, let's say, of Wagner. They have a significant presence in Africa as well.
Okay.
That's a whole different story. We'll not go there right now. And Wagner was fighting the Battle of Bakhmut, which lasted for 244 days. A very long battle.
Very long battle.
Very long.
They say it's a meat grinder or
The
something.
Bakhmut meat grinder. Horrible term, but yeah, accurate. Okay, about half of Ukraine's divisions were eaten up by Bakhmut.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so Wagner was fighting this. At some point in time, Mr. Prigozhin came out with a statement in which he blasted Sergei Shoigu and Mr. Gerasimov, the two top guys in the army, saying that they are not supplying Wagner with arms and ammunition, and they are trying to make sure that Wagner loses and gets killed. And he showed a whole number of bodies, Wagner people lying dead on the floor, on the ground, and he said that, okay, I'm done. We are leaving Bakhmut, now let the Russian army come in and do it. So we are leaving, we are done. Wagner, they're trying to kill Wagner. Ye sab nahi chalega. He says this, but he doesn't withdraw.
Okay.
He stayed in Bakhmut, and in 2 weeks he had won the Battle of Bakhmut. After saying all this.
Okay.
So he made it sound to the whole world like he was completely fed up. He was rebelling against Russia, against the Russian military. He was leaving Bakhmut, but actually he did the opposite. He stayed put and he defeated the Ukrainians.
So you're saying this is not a coup?
This is before the coup.
Okay.
This is before the coup. Okay? So he did this. So this is called a battlefield psyop. It is a battlefield psychological operation. You make it look like you're doing something, but you do the exact opposite. So that's what happened. So then they won Bakhmut. Then a month or two after that, Prigozhin once again comes out and says that the Russian military is trying to destroy Wagner with airstrikes and whatnot, and we are very unhappy. And then what he says is that we are now going to march on Moscow.
Okay.
So he pulls out the Wagner forces from Ukraine, okay, from southern Ukraine, goes eastwards, enters Russia near Rostov-on-Don. He takes the city of Rostov-on-Don and he gets a good welcome from the citizens.
उधर का कोई headquarter he took over, right?
Yeah, it was the main military headquarters of the Ukraine invasion.
हाँ, the southern Russia.
Yeah, so he took that over. Then he starts moving northwards on the highway to Moscow. And the Russian military does nothing to stop him.
Okay.
Okay? He takes a city, nothing happens. He starts moving northwards towards Moscow, nothing happens. Then Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus makes the statement within 24 hours that he has negotiated with Mr. Prigozhin and now the coup is over. And within 24 hours, Wagner group, the Wagner forces are in Belarus.
Okay.
Belarus पहुंच गए. Look at the map, you will see it's a weird, this kind of movement. So what actually happened? Under the pretext of a coup, Wagner redeployed itself from Ukraine into Belarus in
Okay.
full daylight with the Western media clapping.
So what is the actual things behind the
It
scenes?
was a redeployment of Wagner from point A to point B, and point A and point B are very far away, and they redeployed in broad daylight while saying we are doing coup. There was no coup.
So, but Prigozhin was killed
Yeah, apparently he was killed. Maybe eventually
by West or Russia?
Look, the only force that can kill Prigozhin in Russia is Russia itself.
But why would they do it? Because अगर आप बोल रहे हैं कि
कुछ लोग बोलते हैं he is not dead, but वो अलग बात है. Look, see, Prigozhin has a very interesting history. He was a criminal. He spent many years in jail because of his criminal activities. Then he became a business person. He became the main caterer to the Kremlin itself. He established a good rapport with Mr.
food
Putin.
caterer you're talking about.
Food. He was a chef.
Wow.
He established a good rapport with Mr. Putin. He has known Mr. Putin for 20 years, and then he got into Wagner. He recruited people from the prisons in Russia.
Wow.
The deal that it was a Hollywood-like deal. You guys come and join my military force. I will give you a 20% chance of survival. You go and fight in Ukraine. Most likely you will die. If you survive, you will get your freedom and you will get honor, and you don't have to go back to jail. So that's how we recruited people from
Suicide squad.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So he recruited people from prisons in Russia, and he did a great job of creating this Wagner organization. Maybe he crossed certain lines here or there,
Okay.
which is perhaps why he was killed off. But see, the thing is this: he did not die a traitor's death. In Russia, there are many traitors who go to the West and sell Russian secrets to the West. People like Sergei Skripal, Alexander Litvinenko, people who have been exposed as anti-Russia spies, let's say. These people typically are poisoned by the Russian forces, and it's typically either polonium or some radioactive substance that is.
Okay.
So traitors are poisoned. Okay, Prigozhin died in a plane crash. He died a warrior's death. So he was not poisoned. And
But why was he supposed to be dead? That's
see,
the
we
question.
don't know why. We don't know why. There must be a reason. Okay.
So this behind the scenes is something very.
Oh, there's a whole lot that goes on behind the scenes. Okay, it's
Wow.
always a dangerous world that you inhabit when you're doing these activities. Maybe he criticized Mr. Putin. Maybe he said that the invasion was not run properly, or maybe I don't know. He
But
somewhere he crossed the line.
He did exactly what Putin would have wanted, right?
But you can't say certain things in public.
But then you have to make it also look like a coup.
Yeah, so you make it look like a coup by criticizing the Russian military, by criticizing Sergei Shoigu, by criticizing Gerasimov, by criticizing various people. You don't criticize the boss. So maybe he crossed the line somewhere, but he was still not he did not die a traitor's death. He died a warrior's death,
Okay.
and he was given a state funeral.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Putin also obliquely referred to the death and gave condolences. He condoled everybody who died on the plane crash.
Okay.
So that also includes
Basic.
so that sort of thing.
So
yeah.
So now, when you say that Wagner Group went to Belarus, was it meant to have a safe passage for them to be in a friendly country, or do they want to even take over Belarus? Because
So Belarus is, you could say, a vassal of Russia.
yeah.
Belarus is 100% aligned with Russia.
Yes.
Alexander Lukashenko is Putin's guy. And the Russians have even deployed tactical nuclear weapons on Belarus territory, which tells you how much synergy there is between the two nations. It's like the same nation, more or less.
Yeah.
More or less, okay?
Belarus.
And Belarus is north of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So if you want to do further operations in Ukraine, it makes sense to have Wagner redeploy in the north, and then Kiev is not so
They
far.
always had their army ready at the border anyway. Belarus army, right?
Belarus, yes,
Yeah.
but to do certain operations, you want plausible deniability.
Yeah.
So then you use a paramilitary force. So there are reasons why you
You
would
have to
want
even
have.
play the international audience.
There are lots of considerations in this. So if you want plausible deniability, if you want to use a parallel military force instead of the actual military, then you redeploy Wagner there and get some things done. So they are there right now. Some parts of Wagner are still there. Some of maybe after Mr. Prigozhin's death, some elements of Wagner have been reabsorbed into the Russian military, perhaps.
Okay.
So there is some restructuring that's happened, but overall it still exists.
What are the chances that Russia takes over Poland also?
Yeah, it's not going to happen in any time in the immediate future or near future, because Poland has Western protection, and that's a line that Russia will not cross right now, unless the US becomes really, really weak and its power over its hold over Europe starts faltering. So not going to happen anytime soon in the near future.
Yeah, so I just want to end this particular Russia-Ukraine topic with, because Putin has given some statements against Israel that they are just, like the meat grinding is going on in Gaza, but whereas he has done the same thing in Ukraine himself. It's just how hypocritical the world is, right?
See, when we talk about the Bakhmut meat grinder, it was about grinding up the Ukrainian army,
Yeah.
not civilians. Okay?
Okay.
So the Russians have tried their best not to target civilians in the entire Ukraine conflict. You will see it. They could have used the same US tactics of shock and awe, send the air force and flatten the whole cities.
like how they did in Iraq.
Yeah,
Millions of civilians died.
Iraq, Yemen, wherever, Libya, they don't care about civilian deaths at all. The Americans.
Whereas actually in Kiev, there are so many nightclubs that are still going on.
Yeah.
And the women, mainly women, because men are taken into the army or to fight the war, but the women are wearing nice dresses and they're dancing, they're drinking.
So precisely that's what it is. So the Russians have taken great pains to ensure that civilians are not hit. Obviously, civilians will die in a war, but they have tried their best to minimize the casualties. So that is the criticism, that Israel is just flattening Gaza. Now, is Israel right or wrong to do that? I am not getting into that.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the criticism that you're referring to.
Maybe Israel does not have a lot of option because they are
Maybe.
hiding among the civilians.
Yeah, well, what do you do when that's the case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially a country who has to brutally defend itself, right? Like Israel.
And the Israelis also have hostages that have been taken into Gaza.
Yeah.
So when they are bombarding Gaza, even their hostages will be targeted.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately the collateral damage of war.
Yeah.
So I'm not going into whether it's right or wrong. It's not my fight.
a very
I don't
grey
have a
area.
horse in this race.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it is right now.
Because there is no black and white in war. There
Yeah.
is always maybe dark versions of grey. So now let's move on to France and Niger,
Yeah.
because of certain kind of a very interesting history. Because if we think Africa is a free country or a free continent, free from colonialism, but there is a neo-colonialism happening there. How does France do that? Let's start from there. And then what happened? Why did the Niger army made the coup?
Right. So so just to set the context, Africa has been ravaged by the Europeans.
Yeah.
For the past 200 or 200 plus years, maybe almost 500 years, but let's talk about the last 200 years. In the late 19th century, there was what they called the scramble for Africa, in which European nations went into Africa, divided up the lands with straight line maps.
Yeah, even Africa has a lot of... Yeah.
Africa is the worst case of the straight line maps. Just random straight lines drawn on the map.
Because maximum you see is in Australia or US, but Africa is another place where you have lots of... Even Europe does not have that.
Yeah. Europe is organic.
Yeah.
When it comes to Africa, it's these are European powers that came in and drew lines. Okay, this is mine, ye tumhara, ye mera hai. You don't cross this straight line, I will not cross your straight line, and so on. So they ravaged Africa for resources. That's how Europe... see, the UK got rich, the Anglosphere got rich by extracting wealth out of India. $45 trillion in today's money. The other European powers, they extracted wealth out of Africa. And Spain got rich out of South America and so on. Long story. But Africa was colonized for a very long time. After the Second World War and after in the post-World War era, there was this phase of decolonization where all the European nations kind of come out of Africa and say now Africa is free. Okay.
Basically, under the rule of the superpower of United States of America.
Yeah,
That
so-
they ended all the colonialism.
Yeah, so the US won the Second World War. The USSR won the other part of the Second World War. They divided Europe among themselves. Eastern Europe it came under the USSR's sway. And in Western Europe, there was only one real power, the United States. Not Germany, not France, not anybody, the US. The US is still the only power in Western Europe. The other nations are insignificant.
Puppets.
They don't really work. They are puppets. So now that this situation has happened, the Americans have come out on top. In 1958, they officially, let's say, ended the British Empire.
Okay.
The British Empire made one last grab at supremacy in the Suez conflict,
Okay.
1958 in Egypt. I'll not go into the story.
Was Churchill behind it?
No, not Churchill.
Oh, okay.
So the UK, France, and Israel kind of tried to make a grab on Suez, and the Americans put an end to that. So that was the end of any aspirations that the British had left for supremacy. And then the Americans kind of said that we are decolonizing Africa, but Africa was full of resources, so they needed to have actual control over Africa. So, and the French also. So what they would do is they would install puppet regimes. They would do coups in Africa.
Color
If any
revolution.
nationalist leader comes up, get him killed or get him ousted, and install a puppet dictator, and then say that this is a legitimate government. Okay, and that's how it is.
And whenever that dictator went rogue, like in Zimbabwe or other
Get
countries.
another one in his place. And the French have this wonderful system called the CFA franc.
Okay.
The CFA franc is a currency which the French government issues, and it is the currency of a whole bunch of African nations in the Sahel region in Western Africa. Okay, I'm not going to go into the list of nations. It's about 13 to 16 nations roughly, which use this CFA franc. There are two flavors of the CFA franc, but they have the same exchange rate with the euro. So the French control the entire economies of these nations. And they control everything that happens within. They have their own puppet governments over there. There is also another organization called ECOWAS, it's an economic grouping of nations in Western Africa. Nigeria is part of it, and other nations also. So these are various means that the French have of controlling this region. And this region is very rich in gold, in uranium, in various natural resources, in oil and gas and so on. So that's why the French are very interested in this region. So even though the era of colonialism is officially over, and even though these nations are officially and technically independent, they are still controlled by France and by the West.
And how do they do that?
By using the currency.
Okay.
So you are a nation. You have to use a currency issued by a different nation, and that nation determines what is the exchange rate. And your savings are in the bank of that nation. Then what independence do you have? And your government is controlled by that nation. The dictator of your nation is a client of that other nation. So how does it work? Where's the freedom? Right? So it looks like all the nations are free. They have democracy. They have parliaments, or maybe they have military governments or whatever, but still technically independent. But if you look at the way it really works, they're completely controlled by France. So that's how it has been for a very long time.
Similar to India's situation in the beginning of the independent era. Can you say that?
Well, if you look at post 1947 India, until 1950, India was a dominion of the UK. It had dominion status. It was not independent. 15th August 1947 is not Independence Day. It is Dominion Status Day.
Yeah.
Can anyone challenge that? No one can. It's a fact. Okay?
The official letters had the dominion of India.
Yeah, the dominion of India. In 1950, India becomes a republic. Then we have the first elections of whichever year it was held. Until then, our prime minister had been selected.
Viceroy was Lord Mountbatten.
Mountbatten was the viceroy, or
Raja Gopalachari.
Yeah, all that. Governor General, Viceroy, all that stuff. And Mr.
Yeah.
Nehru had been selected as the Prime Minister. He was elected. The first general elections happened in 50, right? 1950.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first actual election. So how was Mr. Nehru Prime Minister before that? He was selected.
And that too, he did not win it.
He was selected.
Yeah.
He did not win anything.
Because Sardar Patel.
It was Mr. Patel who won, but Mr. Gandhi arm twisted the whole thing, and he made sure that Mr. Nehru becomes the prime minister, becomes selected the prime minister.
So British stooges,
Yeah.
and now there is African stooges.
And our armed forces were also until 1958
Yeah.
controlled by the British to some extent or the other.
The chiefs were British.
Yeah, so Mr. Karyappa comes on under until which year? 1948, 50, wherever. But the Army, Air Force look at their chiefs of staff and see what was going
Till
on.
55, I think, Navy or Air Force, and then 58 was
Until
another
58, there was at least one British officer in charge of one of the major branches of the Indian military.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, India was not really free. If you look at it from that perspective, it took a long time. We are only beginning to decolonize now, actually.
one. Actually, mental decolonization is right now.
Yeah, even then we are speaking English. I'm more comfortable with English. So
Yeah.
see, that's what they've done. Anyhow, so Africa was kind of like that.
Or is kind of like that.
It's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. Actually, much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sahel region, this region of Africa, is called the coup belt of Africa. You have coups that happen on a regular basis, but whoever comes to power, their only aspiration is to serve the big daddy,
So that they stay in power.
so that they stay in power and they are given the Ashirwad.
So
Right?
their family is prosperous.
All that. So the deal is that you ruin your country, but you will get some piece of the wealth.
Then what happened in Niger then?
So what happened in Niger?
Niger.
So
okay.
you have Gabon, we have Sierra Leone, you have Niger, all these nations. So in Niger, there was a coup, okay? And this was a nationalistic coup. It was a popular coup.
But it was done by army.
Army, of course, a coup is always done by the army.
Okay, only by army. Okay.
I can't go and do a coup because I don't have
Yeah, true.
the force to back me up.
Yeah.
Let's say I am an African citizen sitting in Niger, and I say, "Ye government bahut bura hai. I want to do a coup." You need manpower to do a coup, and manpower itself is not enough. You need to know how to do a
weapons,
coup.
yeah.
You need to know which organs of government to capture in what sequence, and what. It's a whole
Yeah.
thing. Okay, there's a book in which if you want to do a coup, you can read it.
Let's not spread it in India.
Yeah. So the coup was done by the army, by the military. It was an army officer, General Abdur Rahman Chiani or something, who did the coup. And they expelled the previous government, and they said that France has to go. France has
What
to go
is the
means
reason they gave to expel the government?
corrupt government, international government.
And why
Puppets of France.
suddenly now?
Coups always happen, but for a change, this has been a nationalistic coup.
Yeah.
If you look at the
this-
past 20 years of Niger, there will be many coups.
So finally they gathered the courage, basically. We can say that.
So, how did this kind of coup happen?
Yeah.
Huh? So, I said Wagner has a presence in Russia, not Russia, sorry, in Africa.
Yeah.
Wagner has a wide presence in the Sahel region, okay? And they have been trying to install anti-West governments in Africa, okay? Nationalistic governments that will stand up to the West and do what is best for the country,
they will be
and also
needed,
hopefully
yeah.
do something that's good for Russia as well.
Yeah. And they will be dependent on Russia for the support.
So the Russians, what they do is that they give advisors to these governments, they give scientists, they give geologists, they give army officers, they give arms, ammunition, they give bodyguards, all kinds of stuff. Whatever services are required by these governments to stay in power, the Russians give it. Okay. So they are involved in a large number of nations. Niger is particularly important because it is one of the world's top 10 producers of uranium.
Okay.
And Niger accounts for about 70% of France's uranium. Okay?
Wow.
Yeah. And France, if you look at France, at least 2 out of every 3 lamps that burn in France are powered by nuclear energy. So France is heavy on nuclear. It is a huge success story when it comes to nuclear power. About 60-70% of France's power comes from nuclear energy. And about 70% of that uranium comes from Niger. So Niger is extremely important for
So
France.
50% of electricity is basically...
You could say.
Yeah.
Now, the French were obtaining uranium from Niger at 50 cents a kilo.
50 cents?
50 cents. 40 paisa. 40 rupiah
40 rupiah, yeah.
a kilo.
Wow.
Okay, the market price is about $150 to $200.
Dollars. Oh my.
So that's how they were stealing Niger's uranium. So this government has come in and they have put the price at $200 a kilo. आपको लेना है $200 में लो.
So the army, you're talking
Yeah,
about.
the new government. Okay, that's not the only thing. There is a proposed gas pipeline that will run from Nigeria through Niger into northern Africa and then into France and into Europe. Gas pipeline, and this trans-Saharan gas pipeline could be operational in the next 5 years if you start
Okay.
today. Okay,
Okay.
it will happen fast because
That's
Africa.
why Nigeria has stated that we are ready to attack Niger.
Nigeria is part of ECOWAS, which is controlled
Okay.
by France and the West. And this gas pipeline was supposed to go through Niger. Okay? So Niger is not the petroleum or gas producing nation, but it was supposed to be the transshipment route for this gas pipeline. Now Europe is desperate for energy.
Yeah.
The Nord Stream 2 has been blown up. The cheap Russian gas that was fueling the European economy has stopped. Europe, as a consequence, has gone into recession. The economies are all slowing down. It's a disaster for Western Europe. So they need, see, the best way to destroy an economy is to starve it of cheap energy.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what happened with the Nord Stream, and that's what happened with cutting off the Russian supply. So they need gas, they need energy, and this was a great alternate, way of getting getting the energy into Europe. But if Niger is not willing to play ball, then this trans-Saharan gas pipeline will not happen.
Yeah.
So once again, it's bad for Europe, but who benefits? Russia benefits.
Russia.
So there's this
Then
whole
Wagner
geopolitical
Group,
game that's
Russia.
been playing out.
It's just amazing how the dots are connecting here.
Yeah. So the Cold War, the second Cold War, which we are in now, right now,
Right.
has now come to Africa. So there have been multiple coups in Africa, and all of these coups have been nationalistic coups and anti-France, anti-West coups. And Russia could be involved in this. Wagner could be involved in this. So the Russians are playing a big game in Africa, and when Russia is involved in Africa, the Chinese cannot be very far behind. Because
Yeah,
Russia and
absolutely.
China are also cooperating in multiple ways, and the Chinese have already been investing in Africa with the perspective with the point of view of extracting natural resources out of Africa, because Africa is like it's abundant. It has an abundance of all kinds of natural resources. The Chinese want that, so the Chinese have been investing in Africa for that, and now that the Russians are giving the military muscle, it will help China also. So Africa has become the playground for the new Cold War. The French are kind of losing ground now. Their ambassador has been thrown out of Niger.
Yeah.
Their military also has been evacuated from Niger, which is very strange because the French have the military power to intervene in a
Yeah.
nation like Niger. They have done that many times in the past. They did it in Mali, for example, about a decade ago, less than a decade ago. They intervened in Mali as part of a multinational coalition of force and all that. But how is it so that they were not able to, even though they could not intervene in Niger this time? Something is happening.
Some
Some
bigger
game
forces
has been
behind.
played, and maybe a bigger power than France has prevented France from intervening in Niger. And the only power the French will accept is the US. That's the only power that they bow down to. Nobody else. So it tells you that the Americans are okay with France losing its grip on Niger. If that is indeed the case, that's what has really happened. Which means the Americans actually want Western Europe to become weaker economically. They want to deindustrialize Western Europe.
But US themselves are declining, don't you think?
The US is declining. They still are in a position to intervene militarily anywhere in the world at 60 minutes notice, but not quite the way they used to in the past. Okay, and their military might has not decreased, but their influence has significantly decreased. Nobody can deny that. Their influence in the Middle East, like we discussed, is waning. Their influence in Africa may be waning. Their influence in other parts of the world is also waning. They are purposefully pushing Western Europe into a recession. They are investing more in Poland than in Germany and France. So I don't know what game they are playing, but it's going to destabilize the whole world right now. And more nations are now standing up to the West. And yeah, we are entering a period of great turmoil, actually.
So this question is again coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict or maybe the geopolitics around it. India was getting a lot of cheap oil from Russia some time ago, but recently Russia has announced that they are only going to give to the 5 countries, and those 5 countries, I don't remember exact names, but they are all the ex-USSR blocks. They say India has a different route because they want in yuan trade. Is China now the the overpowering hand over Russia, or is Russia finally now dependent heavily on China? What is this game going around?
Yeah, so when the Ukraine conflict started, there was this very big danger that Russia will become completely dependent on China. And India played a major role in ensuring that doesn't happen by India started importing enormous quantities of Russian oil in rupees. Okay,
Yeah.
so
But they have recently.
yeah, so we'll come to that. So the Russians found this pressure outlet valve because of the Indian import of huge quantities of oil. But eventually now it's so happened that the Chinese have gained more leverage over Russia, and the bloc has formed. You know the way the bloc has formed is China, Russia, and Iran, more or less.
So the RIC has been replaced.
Yeah, instead of India is Iran right now. So that's what's happened, and Russia is now heavily dependent on China. It is not yet quite a Chinese vassal state. Russia does not trust China at all.
Yeah.
The Chinese have been playing the cartographer game also. They are now claiming certain territories that were supposed to be settled and all that. So that is always the case. So that is also is an indicator that the Chinese are now more confident that they can squeeze Russia more. So the world is bifurcating again into two Cold War blocks: the RIC, the Russia-China bloc, and the nations within that, and the Western bloc. And India is kind of in between. India does have excellent relations with the West. India has very good relations with all of the Eastern bloc also, except for China.
Yeah.
Okay? And Russia obviously needs India as a counterweight to China, but right now they need China more than they need India for now, for the short to medium term, because of the squeeze they are getting from the US. So Russia now is saying that if India wants to buy Russian oil, we should buy it in Chinese yuan,
Yeah.
which is kind of problematic for us. But it's good that we have other options. We have the Saudis, we have lots of other options from where to
But
get
then
oil.
the oil prices, when they went up, we would get it costly. Russia was giving us cheaper. So
Yeah,
how
so
does that play?
we took it as far as we could.
Okay.
We imported huge quantities of oil at a very cheap rate, at a good discounted rate. Now it's no longer available. Look, these things don't last forever. Things
Yeah.
keep changing. So we keep on adapting to the changing environment, and we do what is best for us.
So
it's
is there any kind of counter that India can, pose to China's dominance over Russia right now?
India has to grow its economy.
Okay,
It's a 20-year game.
so nothing in next 6 months India can do.
Nope. There's no short-term solution
So
to this.
China has that leverage.
Yeah, so look, see, China is about 5 times the size of India right now, okay, economically.
And they import 5 times Russian oil than India.
Yeah, so it's going to take time for India to rise to that level. Give it another 10, 20 years. In 20 years, China will no longer be able to take the same steps that it takes right now. So for India, the key is to have 20 years of peace without getting embroiled into a major conflict somewhere. Or if there is a conflict, we have to make it end very fast. So that is a challenge for India. It's not going to be easy. But if India has to rise to its full potential, India needs 20 years of peace. By the time the demographic dividend will make itself apparent, and China's demographic decline will be very apparent by that
It's
time.
almost there, right?
Yeah,
Because you said 38 years is the average age.
currently the average age in China is 38
It's
years.
very bad actually.
By 2050, it will be in the mid 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah. By 2100, it's going to be in the 60s. So it's a disaster that China is facing. But right now, they are still a very, very powerful nation. And it's going to be the case of the next 20, 30, 40 years. So it's a long-term game that we have to play.
So the China that has grown in confidence in recent months, does that pose a larger threat of war with India?
Oh, the Chinese will always be wanting to take an opportunity to go to war with India, because they know the direction in which India is going. India is a long-term, genuine threat to China. If India becomes significantly more powerful than what is it today, let's say India becomes a $20 trillion economy in the next 20, 30 years, then Tibet is no longer something they can hold on to.
Yeah.
It's going to be inevitable that Tibet will break itself from China. That's how the forces of geopolitics play themselves. So the Chinese worry and they worry with good reason about India. So they would like to take an opportunity, if it presents itself, to go to war with India and make sure that the economic growth that India is enjoying stops. Because see, India is projected to keep growing without any problems for the next 10-20 years, without any major problems. India is the only nation that has 0% chance of going into a recession.
Yeah.
Okay, India is the only large major economy that is going to keep on growing without any problems, and that is a problem for China. So they would like to stop that, but how do they stop it?
Because either one of us can be the actually powerful one. If both are powerful, it's always going to have some tensions, right?
No, you cannot have two powers in the same region.
In the same region.
Yeah, so it's going to be either China or India. So yeah, they would very much love to go and defeat India in a war, but it's easier said than done. India is a nuclear power; you cannot discount that. And when it comes to going to war with India, the problem is that China has spread itself thin. Its navy is embroiled in so many conflict regions like Taiwan and
South
Japan
China
and all that.
Sea, yeah.
So even though they have a large navy, they needed to patrol all those regions. They cannot divert it into India. If you do that, then you're going to lose the advantage you have over there, the South China Sea region and so on and so forth. Even their large military is needed in these regions, in the Taiwan region, in Japan region. Even to counterbalance Russia, you need the military on the Russian front to some
And
extent.
India has smartly given some submarines to Indonesia, I think, and they have given some BrahMos missiles to Vietnam. So
Yeah.
that is a big
So
threat for
we are
China.
beginning to play this game. We
Yeah.
are now beginning to export homegrown defense equipment,
yeah.
which is a very good step. It tells China that two can play the game. You can arm Pakistan. We're going to start arming your neighbors also, the ones who are afraid of you. So it's a good step that we are taking, and we obviously want to become a major defense exporter in the next 20 years, and it's certainly very feasible the way things are going right now.
So I think we have some 5 to 10 minutes left. Let's end this podcast, this conversation with Indian perspective, because India and Canada, Mr. Justin Trudeau has done something really stupid in recent times. He outrightly in the Parliament of Canada, he blamed India allegedly that they had a very covert operation and killed Khalistani terrorist Nijjar. I don't remember, Hardeep Nijjar, I think. So what is the story behind it? And then Canada's history of harboring terrorists. So please.
Yeah, Canada has a long history of harboring terrorists on its soil. For them, if the terrorists don't pose a threat to their nation, it's fine. Okay? And that's what the West has done. The Anglosphere has done that. If you look at anti-India terrorist activities or anti-India activities of the Khalistani angle, you will see that in the UK, you will see that in Australia, you will see that in New Zealand, you will see that in Canada, and to some extent in the US also.
Okay.
And you will not see much of that in other nations. There
So
is some
the
of it in
Five
Italy
Eyes.
also. So typically, the Five Eyes nations, they are the ones that harbor these anti-India terrorists. And this has been going on since the 1980s. In, I think, 82 it was that our Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, she went to Canada. She met the Canadian Prime Minister, Mr. Pierre Trudeau, the father of Justin.
Yeah.
Okay? And she told him that you have these anti-India terrorists on your soil, and she asked him to extradite a few of these terrorists because they were wanted for major crimes in India, and this guy refused. Okay, and in 1985, the same terrorist blew up an India fighter plane.
Passenger plane.
Passenger plane. I forget the flight number. 182 or something.
182, yeah.
Yeah.
And they let it happen. They never prosecuted
It
them.
was the biggest act of terrorism against Canadian citizens because it killed more than, I think, 200 Canadian citizens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't do anything about it?
They didn't do anything about that because most of those Canadian citizens were of Indian origin, so they don't care, right? Not
okay.
white.
Not white.
So India gave them evidence. India told them that this is happening and hand over these terrorists to us. They are wanted in India. Didn't happen, and then those terrorists went ahead and perpetrated this act of terrorism, and then they learned nothing from it, from this horrible thing, and they kept on harboring anti-India citizens, anti-India forces.
Not only
on the soil.
anti-India, they have ex-Nazis.
That's a whole different story. We'll come to that also.
Hamas.
Yeah. So there's this immigration racket in Canada right now.
Okay.
If you are an Indian And if you want to immigrate to Canada and become a citizen, all you have to do is to go and cry that India is persecuting me politically because I am so and so minority or whatever. Okay?
And you easily get a permanent
and
residence.
you go and demonize the Indian government, say it is a evil Hindutva government,
Okay.
and they are doing bad things to minorities. And I was speaking on behalf of the minorities, so they are persecuting me. You go and tell the story, you will get asylum over there, and very rapidly you will get citizenship. So lots of people have got citizenship like this. And when you go and claim persecution, you have to keep on playing the same story, playing up the same story in Canada. So when it comes to this person, Nijar, Hardeep Singh Nijar, he went to Canada on a fake passport.
Okay.
Okay, he went to Canada on a fake passport in the 1990s, late 90s. And it was clearly a forged passport, so his immigration was denied. Then 2 weeks after his immigration was denied because of the fake passport, he married some local lady
Achha.
who sponsored his immigration.
But how did he enter Canada?
So I don't know how he entered Canada.
Because he was denied, right?
He entered, applied, and was denied.
Oh,
Then he
okay.
should have been deported, but he actually got married
Yeah.
instead of being deported. And then he applies again that my wife is a Canadian citizen. Once again, it was denied because there was clearly a marriage of convenience. So twice his immigration was denied,
Okay.
but he was still in Canada for the next 15, 20 years. Okay?
Without a proper visa.
So clearly he was not a citizen. Clearly he was not a citizen. He was illegally there in Canada. But then apparently at some point in time they say he's a citizen.
Yeah.
Okay? But and the Canadian government is saying that he became a citizen in 2016. Then they changed the statement. They said no, it's 2007 or 8 or something. Okay? They keep changing their statements. And there is an Interpol red corner notice for this guy. Okay, India issued that because he was wanted for big crimes in India. It was in 2016 or 2015 in which the red corner notice clearly says his nationality is Indian.
Okay.
Okay, now Interpol doesn't lie about these things.
Yeah.
Why would they lie?
Why would they,
So
right?
clearly the Canadians have been lying about these things. They have been harboring terrorists on their soil. And some of them are claiming that the Canadian government is importing Indian problems on its soil. Arey bhai, these are Canadian problems. These are your citizens. They are Canadian citizens who are anti-India terrorists. So that is what's going on. There's a big problem in Canada. And some of that is in the US also. That Pannu fellow,
Yeah.
he's a US citizen.
Okay.
Okay?
He's not a Canadian.
He's, I think, dual US Canadian citizen or
Okay.
something. So even the Americans are behind this.
Once he went 5 days missing, people assumed he's dead.
Yeah. And Mr. Doval once said very clearly, and it was leaked to the media, that the only reason the Americans are not acting against Mr. Pannu is because he's a CIA agent.
Oh.
Okay?
And why would Doval say such a
Yeah.
controversy?
So that's what's been happening. These Khalistani terrorists have been targeting Indian diplomats. They have been putting out posters calling for the assassination of Indian diplomats. They took out a big procession in which they glorified the assassination of former Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi. How can you do that in broad daylight in the open in Canada? But you can do it if it's anti-India. They have targeted Indian diplomatic properties. Similar things have happened in London, in the UK. Similar things happen in Australia. So it's very clear that the Five Eyes
The
nations,
temples, Hindu temples.
Hindu temples are vandalized, desecrated, all that. So this is a pattern that you see across the Anglosphere, across the
And
Five Eyes
yesterday,
nations.
New Zealand ministry.
So yeah, so then what happened is that India said that the two diplomatic missions of the two nations, India and Canada, need to have parity in terms of numbers. And this is something that is part of the Vienna Accord Convention or
Yeah.
whatever, that a nation can call for parity and can enforce parity. Okay? So India, and it apparently the 41 or 42 diplomats who were made to go home, who were living in India, they apparently were spies. Okay? Who were interfering in the internal affairs of India. So the Canadians were made to pack them up and take them back to Canada. Now these nations like the US, they have expressed concern about this. And now even New Zealand, little New Zealand,
Yeah.
they have also expressed concern. But who cares?
Who cares, really?
Who cares? So anyway, that's a deal.
But it was a very surprising thing because then after their statements, something I researched, then I came to know that even Khalistanis have a huge hub in New Zealand.
New Zealand?
Which I was not aware before that.
So that's how it goes. Everywhere you have an English-speaking nation, you will have these elements, anti-India elements, who are purposefully given shelter and nurtured on the soil. Because see, the West also, the US, the West is controlled by the US. Okay, the US owns the West. The US also sees India as a long-term threat.
Yeah.
They have already made a big mistake with China, and India is on the same path. The East is rising, whether you like it or not, and they don't want India to rise and become a long-term threat on the long-term horizon. In 20 to 30 years, India also becomes the next China. Then what do the US do? And India's fundamentals are very different from that of China. We are not a dictatorship.
China was actually propped up by the US.
The US thought that if we allow China to rise economically or all that, they will become democratic and they will become like us. And the exact opposite happened. So they messed up big time. They miscalculated horribly and they created the monster. And now they don't want the same thing to happen with India. So they would like India to stay where it is today. Middle power. You know, a $3 to $4 trillion economy, maybe a $5 trillion economy, not more than that. If India becomes a 10, 15, $20 trillion economy, it's a huge problem for the US.
But it's kind of inevitable now.
Unless you mess things up, unless you throw a spanner in the works, unless you drag India into war, and then the whole economy has to reorient itself into the military, you know.
Most probably will happen if there's a puppet government
Where?
in India.
A puppet government should never happen in India.
Yeah.
So 24 is very important.
24 is very important.
Yes.
Because if BJP loses the majority mark, there's a high chance BJP
A coalition government is a disaster.
Yeah.
Okay? So that is the problem with electoral democracy and the Westminster system that we have imported from a very small island in the Pacific, in the Atlantic. This system that we have imported is not suitable for a giant country like India. Okay? It is a system that was developed that evolved over time on a small island. You know, England.
Yeah.
And we have absorbed that wholeheartedly. So eventually we will have to change our system. Okay, we need to have a different system, maybe a
What do
presidential
you
style
propose?
system. Maybe a presidential style system or something like that. Democracy is in our blood. Okay.
But even US presidency, if you look at, they have Senate and Congress.
the US is not a democracy.
Yeah, they're republic, but
They are a republic, but they are not a democracy. They are
Yeah.
naam ka democracy. Are bhai, they have two parties. It's a two-party state. One step above a one-party system like China and North Korea. Where is the party for the Latino people?
Yeah.
Where is the Hispanic party? Where is the party that represents the black people? Where is the party that represents the Native American people? Where is the party that represents the XYZ section of society? In India, we have all that. Where is it in the US?
my next point, which I forgot to say before when we were talking about this, Ku Klux Klan. When the Civil War happened, also before when the North wanted to end the slavery and South wanted to keep it. In all this, KKK, Ku Klux Klan, the founder is a Democrat leader. South was Democrat dominant, and now today suddenly they are the messiah of the people.
Look, I would tell the viewers, US history is very interesting.
Yeah,
Study US history.
we should
interesting.
do one video about that.
We can do it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting to unpack all this. You know,
Because nowadays, they are trying to be that we are
the champions of human rights and democracy and freedom and all that. Just look at your own history and recent history, that too, not ancient
Yeah.
history. Yeah, I mean all US history is recent history, by the way, from our standards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially Biden, if you look at his comments 10 years ago, he's so anti-LGBT
Yeah,
and everything.
Yeah.
And now he's like
No. Now he's the opposite of
US
that.
is breathing again. I think they're suffocating themselves right now.
The US is the champion of hypocrisy, but they have earned the right to be hypocrites. That's something we should also learn from them.
Yeah.
That hypocrisy is okay as long as you've earned the right to be a hypocrite. If you're powerful enough, you can be a hypocrite.
Bigger guns than
And nobody
anyone.
can say anything.
So let's end this conversation with last question. If Trump wins back, I think, in my opinion, you are the expert here, but in my opinion, if Trump comes back, USA again becomes stronger geopolitically. Is that good for India? Because a weak US is better or a coordinating US is better?
Look, I'm not sure if Trump comes back, they will become stronger geopolitically.
Okay.
Because the entire political system will oppose him.
But during his time, he really controlled the military industrial complex.
He
Never,
did
no
nothing
war
of the sort.
happened.
He did nothing of the sort.
Okay.
He tried to do lots of things. Nothing was allowed.
So he wanted to go to war. That's what you're saying.
He did not want to go to war. And that is one thing he was able to do, sure.
Yeah.
He wanted to build a wall. They didn't allow him to build a wall.
Yeah.
He wanted to enact lots of things. Nothing was allowed. The way I see it, his presidency was a failure because he achieved nothing.
But Abraham Accords, geopolitically, I'm saying.
Look, he did a few things. He went and shook hands with Kim Jong-un. He did the Abraham Accords. He had some wins, but true governance comes internally. What was he able to do within the US? Was he able to drain the swamp? Was he able to end the military-industrial complex control of the politics?
Deep
was
state.
he able to end the deep state? Was he able to construct the wall? Internally in the US, he was able to do nothing.
Nothing.
So then he went out and did a few things here and there, but nothing major.
But Afghanistan, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, these things would have been better controlled if he was the president.
Just see, to be president, you have to not just be president in name, but be actually able to implement policy. And he was not allowed to implement policy. His own party at various points in time went against him. Okay? So Trump is an outsider. He's not part of the political system. He's a billionaire. Okay? He's a
Who
self-made
just
man.
decided out of nowhere that he wants to run for president.
Yeah, he took it on his ego that they made fun of him at one of those
Obama,
things. Yeah, during the Obama time. So let me run for president. And he actually shocked the world by becoming president. It was a huge accident, huge mistake by the political system, and they rectified the mistake in 2020. So I think it's.
But he's still the largest Republican politician right now.
Yeah, but I am of the opinion that it will be very hard for him to win 2024.
But he will be the face.
He will most
looks
likely
like
be the face of the Republican Party unless there is something that goes on within it. But I don't see him winning again.
So the elections are getting rigged again.
I will not go as far as to say that openly, but who knows, man? Elections. I mean, we saw what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
It was a joke.
It was a joke.
Yeah.
So with that, I know you have to leave. So इसी के साथ, thank you so much, Abhijit ji.
Thank you for having me.
Have been your fan since I don't know. I was so lucky to have you for my first podcast. Now we are having it again. I just hope I grow and I get to bring you here more and more and again and again. And I hope viewers also want that, and definitely they want that. So with that, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Abhijit.
Thank you.